So welcome everybody to this session on the second day of Birds and Bees Festival. We're delighted to have George Kipp. He's a private land forestry program supervisor with the Missouri Department of Conservation, talking about forest management. Good forest management is important. It provides a lot of benefits to our native pollinators. Oftentimes people don't think of them in that aspect, but they do, and many species of wildlife. So I'm not going to eat too much into Mr. Kipp's time here. So without further ado, you have the stage, and thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Ethan. It's my great pleasure to be here at the Birds and Bees Festival. As Ethan mentioned, I'm the private land forestry program supervisor with the Department of Conservation. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about some good forest management practices that you can implement on your forest or woodland, or encourage your forest or woodland owners to implement if you don't have those. These management practices, like Ethan mentioned, will benefit our native pollinators and other wildlife we have, and they're also very good for the forests themselves. The forest and the plant communities that live in those forests are the base the base of the food chain for nearly everything else, including the pollinators, our birds, and then our other megafauna that we have in Missouri. A quick introduction to our forests. We're very blessed here in Missouri. We have just over 50 million acres of forest. It's about 35% of our state. And the reason private land forestry is so important in this state is that 80% of our forest land is owned by private landowners. You can see here that we do have quite a lot of disturbance. Some of that is both planned and unplanned. And a lot of that disturbance is natural. And fortunately, we are losing a little bit of ground here in forest. You can see here that in both terms of forest land and in number of trees, we are having a very slow decline in forest here. We're losing a little bit of forest land. That's mostly due to development and climate change. And we're also losing live trees here due to climate change, insects and diseases, and development. The trees that we do have are tending to skew on the older and bigger side, and they are growing very well. But what we're struggling with is recruitment of regeneration in the state. So in that mind, I'll give everyone a few good best practices to manage the forest so it can be the best forest it can be. And we're going to go through these in more detail as we go along. But the first one would be leave the best, cut the rest, grow native, maintain diversity, healthy forests produce healthy wildlife, including pollinators, take care of the soil, and always consult with a professional forester and use professionally trained loggers. We talk about leaving the best, cut the rest. We're talking about harvesting selectively. Or managing selectively, even if it's not a commercial timber harvest. There are pre-commercial practices that involve removing trees. And to explain this, we'll play kind of a simple children's game of Would You Rather. And I invite everyone to look at the pictures here. We can't interact the best, and do wish we could do this in person, but invite you all, if you look at these pictures, we'll play Would You Rather, and would you rather keep the cow on my left or my right? And we'll play another game here. Would you rather have the forest on the left or the forest on the right? There's a little bit of trick questions. Is a lot of times people equate small trees with young trees, and they are not necessarily the same thing. Just like the pictures we showed, especially with the cattle. What you want to leave in your forest, you want to manage for its best genetic potential. And as you see here, and I've experienced this many times with private landowners, and go out and use a tool called an increment board to get the ages of trees. A lot of times those small trees are suppressed and stunted because they have poor genetics, and they will never grow into like big healthy trees. They're small and suppressed because they're just meant to be small and suppressed, and their genes aren't as vigorous. So what we want to do is make sure we leave like the vigorous, healthy trees. It doesn't mean always leaving, like large trees. You only have to cut small trees. as we see here, forests have different kind of age classes. They have an overstory, a mid-story, and an understory. Overstory is usually your large, mature trees. Now, mid-story is where you get those smaller, shade-tolerant, kind of suppressed trees. Then you have your understory, which is your regeneration, your actual young trees. Now, when you're managing your forest, you want to make sure you're leaving, your large, mature trees or your regeneration that's actually healthy and vigorous. One of the best ways to do that is to have a consulting forester or a professional logger actually come out with an increment board and test the ages of some of these trees and make sure that they will live up to their genetic potential. Because no matter what you do, that little small tree on the right in the picture there will never grow into a large, like a mature, healthy tree. The next tip I had is to grow native trees and put the right species in the right spot. So when we talk about growing native, one of the reasons we talk about growing native is something called adaptation. And adaptation means that these plants and animals develop certain characteristics over time to help them survive and thrive in certain environments. For plants, they're used to the soil conditions there. You can see in this picture that this is a picture of a glade. So these flowers and forbs are used to growing in dry, rocky, hot conditions where the soil is really thin, and they get a lot of sunshine, not a lot of shade, so they have to bloom very quickly and attach. Likewise, you can see in this picture, this is a picture of down in the Ozarks, and you see the plant community. It's a lush forest. These plants and the trees that grow along the stream, they're adapted to having more moisture and more shade and growing along a stream side. So all these, our native species here, they've developed these adaptations over time to survive and thrive in these different sites. So it's important that if you're either planting or selecting trees or other forest species here, we make sure we favor our native species because they have the characteristics to do well in those environments. Again, they form the basis of the food chain, so they will feed the other plant, the pollinators, the insects, the birds, and then the other wildlife that live there. Non-native species don't have those adaptations, and they can choke out the native species or spread beyond their native habitats. A great example of that would be Russian olive or mimosa silk tree, which they're planted as ornamentals and then escape. Russian olive forms dense thickets that shade out all the other plants and animals. And it gets spread, or invasive honeysuckle that comes in and is spread by birds. It was planted because it is good for birds. It produces berries that birds like to eat. It has attractive flowers for other insect pollinators, but it spreads too rapidly, has no native competition, so it comes in and chokes out native plants, which in turn then weakens the food web and decreases the actual pollinators we have. Let's talk about next. We'll talk about biodiversity here. And when we talk about biodiversity, we're talking about kind of the variety and variation of species that live in an environment. So nature provides services that are really critical to to our survival and every other animal and plant animal on Earth. There's the typical clean air and clean water. They recycle nutrients when they die and decay. They provide food for us and other wildlife. And one of the key takeaways here is that you mentioned the term food web a few times, and everything is connected to everything else in an environment. So all our native pollinators, all our bees are connected to all the other plants and animals in an environment, including us. Now, what happens is that when we start losing our biodiversity, we start to weaken our food web and becomes much more fragile and susceptible to collapse and to damage. So when we have a high biodiversity, provided that's what the site can support, that we have a much more robust food web, and that environment is much more resilient to change. And there are other, reasons too to preserve biodiversity, not only for our, for our pollinators, for our birds, for other wildlife, but there are other just for example, medical discoveries are being made constantly from new species that they discover, from existing species. So a lot of things we just do not know what the impact will be from losing a part of this food web will be over time. Healthy forests produce healthy wildlife, including pollinators. Pollinators are part of wildlife there. The forest is sort of the keystone habitat for nearly every animal and insect on Earth. There are grasslands and prairies that provide this too, but a lot of animals, their food, they're covering their water from forests. So these, in a healthy, thriving forest, we talked about that variety and that resilience, it'll provide the optimal habitat. And as we start to degrade that, the habitat that it can produce also degrades. And we're producing suboptimal habitat that doesn't provide a full range of benefits to the wildlife. We're talking about different characteristic megafauna like deer or elk there. They need some dense forest cover for shade, for hiding, for rearing their young. They rely on hard mass trees like oak to provide nuts to eat in the fall, and they need nice the good clean water that comes out of forests for drinking. One of our next tips there is to take care of the soil. Now, soil is a very underrated component of an ecosystem. The soil is where everything grows from. So when we talk about forests or prairies or glades or any other habitat, we need to talk about the soil here. And soil is what provides the nutrients for all the plants and animals. It actually filters the runoff and cleans the water as the water percolates through the soil. And it itself is habitat to other species like fungi and earthworms and ants and spiders. And these species are nature's recyclers. They're the ones that take dead matter, decompose it, release it back into the food web for the other plants and animals to consume. And one of the things that could really hurt soil is from an improper or poorly planned like a timber operation or other kind of forest management can really impact soils. Here's a picture of some runoff from an improper logging, and it can rut the soil, and that can take decades to fix if it's even repairable at all. It'll wash away the soil, start rutting the ground. It'll carry away all the nutrients in the soil. So that's why it's always important to use a master logger or professional forester. They'll help you write a harvest plan and implement some best management practices that will protect your soil there. And lastly, and this segues into our last forest management tip here, is that it's always important to use a professional forester and a master logger or professionally trained logger. Professional foresters can help you inventory your forest and assess their current conditions. They will work with you to help you develop a specific plan for your property and your goals. And they'll keep your goals in mind, and as well as the goals of restoring native habitat, protecting threatened and endangered species, enhancing the forest benefits for wildlife, protecting water quality and streams. If you are thinking of having any kind of timber sale or doing any kind of timber, forest management, we encourage you to call before you cut hotline. It's a free service we provide to forest landowners in Missouri. You'll get a packet of information. If you own over 30 acres, it comes with a free visit from a consulting forester. The number is there on your screen, or you can go on the website at callbeforeyoucut.com. We also encourage everyone to use a master logger. Now, a forester will help you inventory your forest, and they'll actually help you, plan, set goals. The loggers are the ones that will implement the management on the ground. So we always encourage everyone to not only hire that professional forester, but also select a master logger that's gone through a certification program and taken training to ensure that they're following like environmental, operational, ethical, and business standards that have been developed by the Missouri Department of Conservation and the Missouri Forest Products Association together to develop this certification system. These loggers are verified and they're independently audited to make sure that they're following best management practices and taking care of the environment. In summary, forests are a major part of Missouri's landscape and a major part of our economy. And private landowners like you and others play a critical role in providing healthy forests. We cannot, as a state, provide healthy forests without your help. And I leave you with these key messages of leave it better than you found it, manage for native species, biodiversity is critical, healthy woods equals healthy animals, protect the soil, and use professional foresters and loggers. Thank you for your time, and I just wonder if there's any questions.
Thank you very much, George. Don't hesitate, people attending, to ask questions within the Q&A or the chat function. I'm monitoring them everywhere they exist. George, thank you for that great overview. I know it's a lot to get in 15 minutes, but it's really great because I know that there's a lot of forest owners out there or people that have small woodlots that may be new to knowing of all the great resources we have out there. The Department of Conservation has a host of resources through their private lands, and there's just, you don't have to go in there without backup or knowledge. There's a lot of resources in the state available to help you make those best decisions to help your forest become as healthy as possible and help you accomplish what you want to accomplish in your end goals. So thanks a lot for providing this. I'll put some of these resources and things on your session if they're not there already. And again, I saw another question here, just making sure people know that this is being recorded and it will be available for festival for participants. So, and then in a year or so, we'll probably make them all public. But in the meantime, thank you very much for this, George. I'm not seeing, I see something pop up in the chat. Just wondering, approximately how many private lands in Missouri are managed for commercial growth? Like how many acres?
Are managed for commercial growth? Mm-hmm. We don't have a good handle on that. By and large, mostly, we do have a survey called the National Woodland Owner Survey that we do every year. We survey a subset of forest owners. And we know from that survey that only about like 20 to 30% of landowners actually conduct commercial forest management on their property. So those landowners are typically in the 20 to 200 acre range. So to give you an idea of you can kind of get a rough ballpark there if you know how many acres are commercially managed. But I would say on average, maybe around 20% of forest landowners probably do conduct some kind of commercial timber sale like year after year. And see other resources that rate various species of trees according to the resistance of fire. There are, that's kind of depends, on what site you're growing on too. When it comes to resistance to fire, you're talking about how. This is why one of the reasons I always recommend somebody talk to a consulting forester. I'm not trying to duck the question here, but there are many trees in Missouri. A lot of our hardwood trees will sprout even after being top killed by fire. Like most of your oaks are well adapted to fire. Now, it may damage them from a commercial standpoint, but your species like white oaks, black oaks, those species are very well adapted to fire. They're used to fire. Historically, they evolved with fire. And what would have been a much more probably open savanna-like, landscape at the time of pre-settlement. So the species are used to getting burned. Other species, if they grow in like kind of moist bottomlands, like near a stream, they're not very well adapted to fire. They're used to nice cool fires or cool conditions. They don't get burned very often, so they have a little harder time with fire. Your pines and oaks, so they're much more adapted to it. Other efforts to plant more shortleaf pines on public lands and national forests. There are indeed. We have a partnership with the U.S. Forest Service to restore shortleaf pine, mainly centered in the Ozarks, which is where most of its native range was. So we're doing a lot of shortleaf pine restoration down
I, for one, am a big fan of that because it allowed us to bring back our brown-headed nuthatches, which is
there.
pretty awesome, as well as the elk down in that neck of the woods.
Yeah, great effort. Well, tell everybody too, I have my email there, Ethan, on the screen. If anybody has questions, please visit our website at mdc.mo.gov, or feel free to drop me an email. Be happy to hear from everyone. So.
I'm not seeing any more questions pop up here in the Whova app, so I think that about covers it. Once again, we really appreciate all you do, and I know you've got a pretty busy schedule, and we appreciate your time here at the Birds and Bees Festival. Can't wait. Hopefully, we can have you back in person in the future and answer all these questions right up front with people.
Yeah, thank you, Ethan. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you all.
Yeah, take care.